Okay, so we are live. This is American Gladio, and we have with us a guest. He was on two times before, I think, talking about Mao Zedong, but now we're going to talk about probably everything else besides Mao. We're going to talk about stuff that has to do with today, with Sun Feiyang from the Windy City, which coincidentally has imperialistically spread its weather on the rest of the country. So, you know, um, welcome back. What's the mood over there in Chicago right now? I mean, it's frozen. It's been the end of the year. You still have Rahm Emanuel, and the Bulls are, turning the corner.
It's not so bad. It is cold, but we've been spared from that bomb cyclone tornado thing that the East Coast is getting. So it looks like it's going to be above freezing from Sunday onwards. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, you can dump your motor oil outside, and it'll at least not pool in the ice. So, I mean, there's an advantage. So, I kind of wanted somebody uh, whose views I didn't know as much about as some of the other people that I've brought on. So, first of all, let's talk about this Steve Bannon nonsense that's been going on. That is, I think it's much less of a important story than other people do. Do you think that this feud is real, and do you think it'll actually damage Donald Trump's presidency?
So from what I was reading today, it seemed like Bannon was about to put out a statement saying that the book had mischaracterized his quotes until Trump really laid into him with that broadside. So that seems to me to indicate that it probably was the publisher taking a little bit of liberties. Like there's a lot of fantastic claims in that book that I don't think are entirely substantiated. So it definitely seems plausible that it was exaggerated, and Trump might have overreacted a little bit to the news, and that may be what's really driving the rift here. So it seems more to be, it's just kind of a personal dust up. Doesn't really seem to really be about anything policy. Is not really that important, I don't think.
Well, what I saw also um, was that on many of these, now I don't know if I know that you're on Facebook too, because I think um, that's how I found you. But in any case, the New York Post, for example, they keep posting new revelations from the book, and the liberal commenters will always say, "Well, people are so pissed off now. Well, I thought you thought Bannon was God until a month ago." They really think that the book is written by Steve Bannon. They don't realize that that's not. Steve Bannon is one of the people quoted in the book. So there's a huge amount of liberal disinformation going on their side of the aisle, and I find it like striking how few people actually, you look at whatever article it is, and within 2 seconds you see that the author of the book isn't Steve Bannon. It's this guy from the Hollywood Reporter. So I kind of agree with you, and I've heard a lot of the inconsistencies, such as the one about John Boehner, where Trump didn't know who he is or something. I thought that
Their
was,
golf buddies. Yeah, it
yeah,
seems
that was one of
kind
the.
of
I
silly.
think I think that this class action. What do you think about this cease and desist order though that he had his lawyers draw up? Do you think that was a dumb move? Did you hear about that?
I hadn't heard about that actually.
So he tried to file a cease and desist order to prevent the publishing of the book. I think he should let
Oh,
the book
oh,
get
oh. Okay.
published, and then he can chop it up, have some of his people. There's people that would be glad to go through it and already have gone through it, like you've already mentioned, and state that this stuff is basically bull. But that's where I think it's headed. So there's another issue that I wanted to bring up with Chicago. So I saw this article. USA Today says that there's 650 murders in 2017, and it calls it a grim sign of improvement. Now, I don't know what part of Chicago you live in. I'm not big, I haven't been to the city, and what I mean, would you say that the crime has been overstated in the media, or that it's kind of an issue that
So
is
yes
misrepresented
and
in any
no.
way?
It is a big issue, but it's also very, very geographically concentrated in Chicago. Like if you were to plot out all of those murders in shootings in Chicago, you'd find that they fall into some very specific neighborhoods. And so for those neighborhoods, yes, it's absolutely, it's a terrible situation. It's a very important issue. But, for large swaths of the city, your downtown area, Lincoln Park, all that, it's quite safe. And I had read something a while back that, the spike in gun violence is really due to the breakup of the big gangs, criminal gangs in Chicago, and that caused them to splinter into a lot of smaller gangs, which are constantly fighting with each other, over territory, and that's really what's driving a lot of this violence. So, unfortunately, there's a huge supply of guns out there, and the most stringent gun control laws aren't going to get those guns out of their hands. It might make it a little bit more difficult for them to buy new guns, but there's plenty of guns out there to shoot. So
Well, I had a discussion
go ahead.
once, probably a few months ago, just like a short remark that in Chicago, I think it was 13% of illegal gun crimes, like illegal possession of a firearm, were actually prosecuted. So yeah, you can make the laws, but if you don't actually enforce, I mean, enforcing them would be arresting, but beyond enforcing them, prosecuting
Right.
them is really the intent. But they've already got a lot of people in prison, and um, these gun laws, I believe, are kind of they're very humble pie at this point. If,
Yeah.
am I using that metaphor right? What?
I I think you can use it that way.
Yeah, I don't know if I don't remember how you use the term humble pie, but in any case, so you're saying essentially, if I'm understanding it, that it's a huge problem, but it's not a huge problem for people who live in the right areas where you can avoid gang violence.
Right. It's very geographically concentrated. So, most people who live in Chicago, they hear about the shootings on the news, but, it's not really part of their daily lives.
Yeah, we have this site that I'd seen it before, but yesterday somebody brought it up on a broadcast that I call into often, called Hey Jackass. I don't know if you ever see it, where they actually log geographically every single. Here, I'll show it on screen if anybody wants to look at it. I don't know if you're on your computer or your phone, but if you're on your computer, you'll see this. And it just shows, you go to the front page and it'll show monthlies, last month, this month, 2017. Um, it's very well tallied. It has that geographic distribution that you're talking about. And I think that given this, now Mayor Emanuel is not going anywhere for the time being. Uh, do the people that you interact with in Chicago, are they seeing some sort of kind of he's built like his own castle in the city, and he's gotten everything important within it? Like he's kind of that's the impression I get from what I see in the news about Rahm Emanuel.
Yeah, I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone in Chicago who say that he likes Rahm Emanuel, but despite, that kind of sentiment, I think he probably is safe, especially the next election. I guess he gets I guess an ultra charismatic challenger from the left, but more or less, I think he's going to be around. You might call it corporate cronyism, but he's been relatively business friendly as the mayor of Chicago. He's brought a lot of companies' headquarters to Chicago, um, like McDonald's actually is the one that's moving its headquarters from Oak Brook to Chicago downtown. I think that's actually happening sometime this year. They put a big bid together for Amazon's second headquarters. So if you can deliver on those, I think he'll be around for a while. That would be a pretty big get for the city. So I think he's tolerated, even though he's not wildly popular by any stretch of the imagination.
But the thing that confuses me though is that everybody talks about how Illinois has some of the worst tax structure in the country. So how is it that he's able to get businesses to move in? Is he giving them like actual tax breaks to specific companies and things like that?
Yeah, so that's the thing with luring companies. Like, if your taxes are already low, there's not much else you can offer in ways and incentives, right? You can say, hey, look, we have a really great business environment. But if you're in a high tax state, you can tell a company, say, hey, you come here. I'm going to like basically make sure that you pay no property taxes for 5 years. I'm going to lower your tax rate to this much for, X amount of time. You have a lot of room to give incentives to specific companies. And that's what really helps swing these like one-time deals. So although you might say the overall business environment it's actually a pretty good environment for Rahm to bring in these kind of relocations and deals, because he's got a lot of leverage and he's got a lot of room to offer, these kinds of tax incentives.
So he's basically like the class. I mean, he was a Clintonian Democrat, but he's basically like a local version of that, that neoliberal person who's all about, the cosmopolitan city, keeping, you know, keeping the city open for business, but neglecting a lot of the lower income residents that he sort of campaigned to in his elections. That's would that be a fair representation?
Yeah, I think that's a very fair representation, and that's why I think most of Rahm's fiercest critics in the city are definitely from the left. Um, like, I would say the Republicans in Chicago, though they aren't Rahm's biggest fans. It could be so much worse than Rahm as mayor, I guess. So, he's tolerated.
So moving away from Chicago, let's talk a little about international politics before we get to this article that you showed me today. But I want to leave that. Well, let's do it in 5 minutes because we don't have tons of time. But Russia today, they said that there's a meeting at the UN tomorrow, called by the U.S. to discuss the situation in Iran. And they're going ballistic over it. They're saying this is fucked up. We should leave Iran to its own affairs. But the UN doesn't do anything that of consequence with its resolutions. Now, do you think that this is kind of like balancing out? Like last month, they flipped a shit over the Israel stuff with the Jerusalem. Um, what do you see this? I mean, I think it kind of shows how useless the UN is. That's my impression. But how do you see this type of brinksmanship between Russia and the United States?
Yeah, so the UN is pretty inconsequential in terms of actually getting stuff done. It is useful as a forum in which you can get, ostensibly all the countries together, and you can hear their opinions on things. Opinions that probably won't translate to actions, but their opinions nonetheless. And even if you were to empower the UN, there's really not much I could see you like doing through the UN, right? Like, there was a nuclear deal signed by the U.S., like the EU and other Asian countries are participants as well, but that wasn't done through the UN, right? That was negotiated with the Iranian government and the European Union. So, like, sanctions enforcement isn't done by the UN there either. So, outside of any non-binding resolutions, there's really not much you can expect out of the UN regarding Iran.
Yeah, well, and the reason, I obviously like, I personally, I mean, I want the revolution. I want something to happen in Iran for the people. I don't want an international intervention or U.S. intervention or on the other side, a Russian intervention. But like I watched these shenanigans with the UN, and I watched it last month with the Israelis. And with the Israelis, it was like the world condemned the move, and the U.S. vetoed the resolution in the Security Council. In this case, the world, or whoever cares, is going to condemn Iran, and Russia is going to veto the resolution in the Security Council. So, my impression is, when America has a problem with North Korea, who do they go to deal with? Directly to China or Russia. They negotiate it bilaterally. It, you know, more gets accomplished there than with the UN. Same thing with Iran. Same thing with some of these other countries. The Philippines. Uh, it seems like countries can just interact bilaterally. I mean, I don't see the purpose of a body like that. I kind of don't see how the vision of the UN has gotten anywhere.
Yeah, it definitely really hasn't lived up to its original purpose, and there are probably a lot of reasons why that is. And right now, it's more or less just a glorified forum for countries, to throw resolutions at each other that don't really translate into action. So, like you're right, most things either get done bilaterally or they're done at other forums, like say the World Trade Organization. All the countries get together there, but the things they do, actually translate into actions. Or, like at the IMF, that another international organization that actually does have some impact. Like compared to those, the UN does seem to be relatively ineffectual.
Yeah, or OPEC. OPEC is, I mean, they do something
Right.
for oil prices. I mean, now let's get to the article. You shared this. I thought, I have a feeling what you think about this, but this Max Boot, um, he says never Trump doesn't owe anyone an apology, and then he goes and he lists Donald Trump's accomplishments over his first year of office, and then he kind of goes on some sort of you know like some sort of kitten tantrum or something, and I mean he's out of his mind in my opinion. Like he's pretending that he's standing up for the real face of conservatism. Now I don't know how you affiliate politically. I've started to call myself an independent because of things like what I'm reading in this. And he says he started calling himself a classical liberal, which is kind of ridiculous in my opinion. Now, what do you think about these never Trumpers? You live in Chicago. Um, it's not a well-known conservative state. Um, what do you think their deal is? Why are they so obstinate to just continue to complain and put themselves out there?
Well, there's a few reasons, and I think most of the never Trumpers that you heard about during the election, actually a lot of them have kind of accepted that, okay, like Trump may not be the guy that we wanted, but he's delivered on some conservative initiatives. He's gotten some things done. He's made some good appointments, like even Rich Lowry at National Review. He had a nice article the other day admitting he's like, hey, like he may be kind of a loudmouth. He may be kind of a bad person, but look, we have to admit he's gotten tax reform done. He's made some good appointments, especially in the judiciary, and he deserves some credit for that. So those never Trumpers, like I think they're fine, right? Like they can admit that certain things Trump has done has been good for the conservative cause, but the never Trumpers that have held out till now, basically, they're, I would say, like maybe 95% of them you can call as neoconservatives, and that includes Max Boot, Bill Kristol, uh, Eric Erickson. I don't know how I'd classify it, but I think Bill and Max are the two prime examples. And the reason for that is that I they really aren't that conservative. Like neoconservatism grew out of kind of like a more Trotskyite type of thought, and these they had to leave the Democratic Party because they thought it was too pro-Soviet, so they ended up joining the Republican Party. But I never thought that they really believed too strongly in a lot of conservative principles. Like what they were most passionate about was like Trotskyite intervention. Like, hey, we're going to go around the world. We're going to reshape the world in our image. We're going to start democratic revolutions across the world. we're going to build these nations up like the U.S., and that's how we got into Iraq and Afghanistan, right? And really, that was their vision. And I think what you're seeing now is that these neocons are starting to realize that they're kind of losing influence and control in the Republican Party, and if they want to head back to the Democratic Party, that's absolutely fine with me.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm somebody who I've been kind of disgusted with structural corruption in the Republican Party. I've never been active in any party. I my family is staunch Democrats. I kind of left the Democrats because of Al Gore, who was an idiot, and drifted, and finally in 2008, Ron Paul came along, and I'm like, this is a guy who has a fresh attitude, even though he's a million years old, and I kind of begrudgingly voted for Mitt Romney, who I immediately regretted, and wanted to support Rand Paul in 2016 when he pulled out. Trump won. I was like, you know, whatever. He's probably not going to win. But then I saw he has that, uh, that merchant attitude. I wanna strike deals with people. Has worked with people in the Republican Party. Tried to work with people in the Democratic Party. And I think he's helping. First of all, he's helping expose uh, through his own travails all this crap with the surveillance state and everything, which Max Boot has been a huge cheerleader of.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
maybe, I mean, I'd like to hear your opinion on kind of why I think they're still bitching about it. Um, I think that a lot of it is because they don't believe in real conservative values. Like Charles Krauthammer, who's kind of considered a never-Trumper neocon, once said, "Universal health care is almost inevitable." I'm like, well, it's inevitable if you don't come up with an alternative. Uh, that's my opinion. Now, I mean, if you just sit there and pretend that you don't have any ideas, or you don't have any ideas, yeah, that people are going to gravitate towards the most obvious idea. But the other reason is because a lot of these people, they've spent 20 to 30 years writing these well polished articles, wearing their bow ties, and looking smart and pretending that they're the moral compass of conservatism or whatever they call it. And then this the apprentice star comes in and sweeps the entire party out off under their feet. And he's a star among people that have nothing to do with conservatism. Like some of these Californians who are like Latino but believe in America or whatever. And sometimes it doesn't make sense to me, but uh, the whole point is that we need kind of a new chaos in politics in order to get anything done. It's been really well entrenched. What do you think about that idea that they're like these old fogies? They're stodgy people. They want conservatism for themselves. They don't want to advance conservatism.
Yeah, and some of it may just be denial too. Building off what you were saying, like they've been in charge of the party apparatus for so long. They had so many preferred candidates in that primary, and all of them got rejected by the party's actual voters. That's really hard to come to terms with. That your base has rejected what you've tried to build for decades, and so what a lot of these people have fallen back on is really a very Hillary Clinton line, like, oh, well, that's because the base is prejudiced. The base is racist. The base is deplorable. It's not our fault. We didn't do anything wrong. It's really the base that has failed us, right? Like, and that's how they're coping with the whole Trump candidacy and presidency.
Yeah, there's this intellectual snobbery that's in place, and one of the things I hear the complaint about is, oh, they're ruining our party and they're ruining our movement. And I'm thinking neither of those things were amazing to begin with. In fact, Mitt Romney was somebody I thought, well, basically almost made me quit following politics because you have the guy who came up with or at least promulgated the original idea behind Obamacare, which is an idea that it's been proven to be a colossal failure, and people are like basically kissing his feet still. to this day.
Oh, he's
And
going to be back in the Senate soon too.
oh, I can, I'm basically ready to, drink the hemlock or something. But what I wanted to, and we have a hello from Larry Gerke, who's a frequent listener. But um, what I think is going to be funny is to watch exactly how these weirdos, like Evan McMullen, for example. Um, have you heard of that guy?
Oh,
He was,
absolutely.
yeah, he I believe is not just all the things I've already said about these neocons, but he himself is complicit in some of these shenanigans going on with the deep state, or whatever people want to call it, if you're not comfortable with that term. And I don't understand what the appeal of these people is. So, I mean, you personally, I mean, where do you stand right now? Would you say you're closer to supporting this administration, or are you kind of like disillusioned with everything going on?
Well, I mean, for disclosure, I did vote for Trump both in the primary. I was in one of the later primaries. I voted in Virginia actually. That's where I
Hmm.
was living during then. I also voted for him in the election. A large part of that was just distaste for Hillary and Hillary Clinton. But there were a couple of things I did like about Trump. I liked that he was talking about issues that I think common people cared about, whereas Rubio and Cruz, like they're just regurgitating the same slogans that George Bush and Mitt Romney and John McCain had talked about for so long, and they kept talking about Reagan. Like, look, Reagan was almost 4 decades ago, right? No one, people who were able to vote for Reagan, they're like 60, 70 now, right? Like they just seem so disconnected from political reality and what the people actually want to hear about. And that was just, it was really refreshing to see like Trump come on stage and not talk about any of that, right? He was just talking about, hey, legal immigration. People care about that. People want our laws enforced, and that stuff resonated. Like Rubio talking about, I don't know what Rubio was talking about. None of that held any water with the electorate.
Yeah, I think that there were a couple candidates who were, they weren't like, basically plastic people. Mike Huckabee technically is okay. Um, Rand Paul was my preferred candidate, um, because he kind of is, in many ways, he breaks with the Republican platform
Yeah,
on
he
a
does.
number of issues. And Ted Cruz wasn't awful to me, but there were certain moments when he really looked like he was, uh, he was ready to basically slide into any any base on the field, spikes up just to win. It was kind of pathetic at certain points. Um, and then John Kasich, I just despise, even though I voted for him in Ohio. At the time, I was a never Trumper, and you know, I regret voting for Kasich, even though I mean nothing came of it. But um, we have a question from the chat. Do you think Iranians will succeed without U.S. intervention? Real quick.
So the answer is no. I think the protests are dying down somewhat already, and it really needs to be rural driven. There needs to be like mass uprisings out in rural Iran for it to really succeed. And from what I've seen, there were some protests out in rural Iran, but mostly it's been in like Tehran and the large cities. And that kind of movement is never going to succeed. Like, what are they going to do? How are they going to, go out into the countryside? How are they going to displace all of the Revolutionary Guards there, right? Like, it really needs to be driven by, your average Iranian, not like one of the relatively well-off Iranians in Tehran for it to succeed.
Yeah, I think and Larry's saying, let the U.S. intervene in the U.S. and leave the Iranians to do their own thing, which I think I kind of share to some degree. I don't think that we should ignore Iran, but um, I think the only real effect here will be a very sharp depression in the Iranian economy just because there's going to be a lot of labor unrest. But like you said, it does have to be almost, especially in the rural areas, kind of an uprising. I think I agree with that. Couple of last topics I wanted to touch on. So, with respect to China, I see you post all this stuff all the time. Kind of interesting. Don't know what the don't know what your perspective is. So do you think China in the South China Sea are kind of asserting their territorial rights, or are they being expansionist as the Philippines and as the U.S. sphere calls it?
So the Philippines is an interesting country because they've more or less reversed their position on the South China Sea. Duterte refused to recognize that tribunal's ruling in the Philippines' favor, and that was actually a pretty drastic turnaround for the Philippines. Like the previous president had been more or less in line with the U.S. policy. So the I would say that the South China Sea to China is kind of similar to our Gulf of Mexico. Like we do share a lot of the coastline with the Gulf of Mexico with Mexico and Central America, but more or less the Gulf is American waters, right? You wouldn't see Mexico trying to assert any sort of like naval projection there, right? And China kind of sees the South China Sea as their Gulf of Mexico, like it's their Monroe Doctrine. So I wouldn't call it. I think assertion of territorial rights is pretty dumb. It's like the 13 dash line that China's drawn there is it's pretty crazy. Like there's really no historical basis for that. But if you were to look at it as China's Monroe Doctrine, hey, it is in their backyard, and there's really not much you can do about it because the Southeast Asian nations are not going to unite as one voice and oppose Chinese expansion there because, frankly, a lot of them don't like Vietnam, and Vietnam is the primary antagonist to China right now. Like Laos absolutely hates Vietnam. Cambodia thinks Vietnam is interfering in their domestic politics too. So you've got two major members of ASEAN right now that pretty much disagree with anything Vietnam tries to put out there. In fact, Cambodia had recently vetoed a joint communique by the ASEAN to assert that, hey, the South China Sea should be free and open to all. So because the Southeast Asian nations are so divided, China's kind of playing them off each other. And now with the Philippines shift, like really it's kind of going to happen unless the U.S. wants to start a shooting war over it. I think China is pretty much going to just keep on building their islands there. But I think from a U.S. perspective, it's concerning, but it's also not that concerning. Like the Chinese Navy is in no way, shape, or form capable of actually fighting the U.S. Navy. Like they have two aircraft carriers. One of them is an old retrofitted Soviet one. They're more or less for show. Like they would never actually see any real combat. They'd be sunk, in a matter of hours. Like if there were actual shooting war, I guarantee you both those ships go straight to harbor and they don't come out for the entire war. Which is what the Argentinian Navy did during the Falklands War too. After they lost one of their cruisers, they sent all their other big capital ships right back home.
Yeah, yeah. Are you talking about the General
Yeah.
Belgrano?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, I mean, you know some stuff that few people do.
So yeah, that's
yeah, I think Americans we don't really know. First of all, China is a sophisticated country in ways that they're beyond this discussion in so many ways, and we didn't cover them in our Mao discussions because that's only one person in Chinese history. I do want to have you back probably in 2 weeks or so when I discuss a book concerning China and a certain Arkansas politician. So expect a
sounds
message
good.
from me. Uh, and that last topic. So I see you post all this stuff about Britain and Brexit and Winston Churchill and whatever. So do you have some sort of like beef with Britain or something, or is it like kind of a gag?
So it's yeah, it's part serious, part gag. So I really dislike the British royalty. I dislike how popular it is in America. I hate it when friends share like, oh no, like the royals had another baby on my feet. So part of it is a reaction to that. Um, I really do love Ireland too. I love Irish music. Like I love Gaelic. Um, I'm pretty sympathetic to the Irish Republican cause, even if not so much like the Provos and their actions. So there's some of that too, and also, man, I just don't really like any recent British prime ministers either. I don't like Theresa May. I thought Cameron was kind of an idiot too. There's not really much in Great Britain or England that I can identify with too. So I kind of enjoy watching them, flail around like in these Brexit negotiations. Like I didn't think Brexit was necessarily that bad of an idea, but the way they've handled these negotiations, especially Theresa May being hamstrung by the DUP in Northern Ireland, like it's absolutely hilarious to me. So, I do enjoy having a little bit of a laugh at that. But
I think
yeah,
we're
it's
yeah,
half serious, half gag.
that's funny because like I thought you were like actually like a full on like raging Anglophobe, which like I'm actually yeah, like I do like Irish culture. I like which is besides the point, but like you're talking about, and it's kind of weird to appreciate both the Republican side and I guess the other side or whatever because I've studied a lot of it, but um yeah, the royalty thing. I was looking at all these idiots from all sectors of American public fawning over this Meghan Markle and Prince is it Prince
Yeah,
Harry? And I'm like,
ridiculous.
these are two morons you'll never meet in your life. They wouldn't hang out with you. I mean, you can't even iron their clothes. Let it go. I mean, nobody cares about. It's bizarre to me, and it's almost I think it's worse than our obsession with American celebrities. But with the British society, I'm a huge fan of British culture and especially music and I guess to some extent literature. And Nigel Farage, I've been following his publications and I actually listen to his radio show once in a while. And I think he's one of the most he's kind of talking about not just the sovereignty of the British people, but the sovereignty of any nation, the right to claim it. I think it's something that countries all over the world are talking about right now, and it's really I think the Brexit was on the whole a good thing. And I was talking uh, over the past few months with some of these Catalonians, and they're progressive people, but they believe in their own sovereignty. And I think we're talking about China. Do they have rights over the South China Sea? Where does that conflict with Vietnam or whatever? I think we've gone through all these countries in uh, what is it, like 35 minutes or so, and we've come to the conclusion that maybe they should probably just negotiate bilaterally and cut a deal, as Trump would say, instead of going to this Flushing, New York, where the UN is, and sitting there in a suit and yelling at people. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely,
So
absolutely agreed.
so anyway, last note. Do you think? I mean, I didn't look at the standings recently. Forget basketball. What? How about the Bears? Do you think this Trubisky is he going to take hold in Chicago? I mean, it's a rough city for a quarterback.
It's hard to say because they never really gave him a chance to demonstrate his talent. Like it was such a run heavy game they did this year that you really didn't get to see many opportunities for him to try and throw the ball. And in terms of receivers, like our ostensible number one receiver, Cameron Meredith, tore his ACL in the preseason. Kevin White got hurt again, went to IR. There's really no one else, pass catching core for him to throw to. So I think the jury's still out on whether he's going to be a success or not. Like I didn't watch him play at UNC either, so I really have no idea. Um,
Yeah.
we will have a new coach though, so
Oh, I didn't know that.
a lot depends. Yeah, John Fox got fired, so we're interviewing for a new coach now too.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I live in Cleveland, but I've been a Dallas fan, and apparently John Gruden rated all of our assistant coaches, so it's gonna be
Okay.
interesting, watching that happen. But
Yeah.
yeah. So thanks for. I know you have to go to work. I also have to go to work a little earlier tomorrow. But thanks for coming on. We'll be glad to talk to you again. Hopefully, we'll get other people, panelists, with you because you know you kind of you provide like a whole different angle, and I can shut up more because I cough all the time because you kind of elucidate the points a lot more smoothly. So thanks again, and have a great weekend. And this is
You
Bold Like a
too.
Leopard. Everybody, put your comments in the chat,
Thanks
and
for having me.
have a great night.